Hey, Marty James here. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about something that's probably not on your radar. So, we have a new administration. There's, some tax law that's going to be changing. And one of the things that hasn't impacted very many people in the past, since, maybe 1999, is the estate tax. And what's happened is, over the last several years, the exemption that we get has grown to where now it's $11,700,000 for 2021 for somebody who passes away. I think this is about to change, and historically, if we look at when the estate tax has come back into play in a major way, it's usually been because of like a crisis, such as wars or whatever. Well, our crisis is the COVID thing, in addition to some wars. But the other thing that has been another reason it's come in is because there's this perception of this great disparity between basically wealthy and unwealthy, or the haves and have-nots, and that tends to be another factor. And I think we're kind of there right now, which gives them ground cover to actually start reducing these exemptions. Now, the estate tax, we've had some pretty high rates, before. Earlier, like in the 90s, we had like a $600,000 exemption. But currently we're at that $11,700,000. At the end of 2025, we're going to go back down to 5 million, and that 5 million though is indexed for inflation. However, the Biden administration has indicated that they would like to have 3.5 million, and they've not said anything about any indexing. We just don't have that much in detail. So we're kind of planning around that 3.5 million. You say, well, I still don't have 3.5 million. And so what you have to realize is that we have, that's for a married couple. Typically what happens is at the first death for a married couple, there is no estate tax, and the surviving spouse just gets everything from the deceased spouse. And that could actually, now we could be in a situation where we just have that one $3.5 million exemption, and that could be a problem. So, with that being said, with where that exemption is today, well, let me go back to, what we used to do is when the first spouse would pass away, we would create this thing called a credit shelter trust. You might have seen it as like the family trust. And the idea was to, to push enough money into it, just, right below the estate tax exemption, so there's no estate tax. And then when the second spouse dies, that's not a factor in the estate tax calculation for that deceased surviving spouse. So that worked okay in the old days, when we didn't have people with extremely large IRAs. And today we have people who have got quite a bit of money in IRAs, and it's just not very tax efficient to try to fund that bypass trust with the IRA money because of the tax implications to that. So Congress put in this thing called Portability. And essentially what it is, and it's something that's being overlooked by a lot of people right now, because all the focus on, when somebody dies has been on income tax planning. But with the portability, what that allows is for when the first spouse dies, the second spouse has the ability to reach in and grab that deceased spouse $11,700,000. So if you think about that, first spouse dies, and the way you do this is you file, a Form 706 within 9 months of death. You can actually, do extension, get past that. And there's some provisions. If you miss that date, you can go back. If you're outside of 2 years, it's going to cost you a little bit, as far as, paying the IRS to tell you it's okay. So what would happen, in today's world, let's say we have a couple with $5 million, and first spouse dies, the surviving spouse files their 706, claims that $11,700,000 of exemption for themselves, and now when they pass away, let's say the exemption is only 3.5 million or lower. So let's say it is 3.5 million. So the first spouse or the second spouse, the survivor who passed away, now has a $3.5 million exemption, but laying on top of that is that $11,700,000. So we're pretty much sheltered from having to pay any estate tax at that point in time. And so it's something you really need to consider. Kind of look at yourself. You say, well, maybe I don't have. I'm not going to even be close to that. Well, there's no guarantee that 3.5 million is going to be where they're going to stay. If they realize they're not getting enough money, they may determine that wealthy people are have a lot less money, and decide to drop that exemption even more. So it's something you really need to think about. I guess if you play the lottery, if that ever happens, or I would say if Ed McMahon showed up at your doorstep, that's likely not going to happen now. But if the prize patrol does, hey, you could be in a situation where you do have an estate tax problem, and you need to consider potential inheritances and things like that. So just know that if a spouse dies, there's some things you probably need to look at that you hadn't really considered in the past. And if you've had somebody in the family pass away, or friends and such that this has happened to, and they did not file this 706 form, then they still have an opportunity to do that, and it may be worthwhile. And really what you do is you really kind of think of that, the cost to prepare that 706 is really an insurance policy premium. It's just insuring you that you're going to pick up that $11,700,000. And IRS has said they're not going to claw that back. So once you get it, you got it. Now there's some special rules if you get remarried, because it's the last deceased spouse rule. And if you're in that situation, it's a little bit more complicated. And we would need to talk about that before a surviving spouse would decide to get remarried. So with that, just keep that in the back of your mind. It's one of those things not a lot of people are talking about. As a matter of fact, I was on a virtual conference, posed the question about what their thoughts on the estate tax what is, and do they think portability is being underused. And you could literally see their faces go blank. They recognize that yes, it is. So again, just if you see that situation, just know that's available to you to help protect the family and your heirs.